How will we know when the Hamas is finished, 100% done? It's not yet the case, but there's one thing that's going to tell you right away: the Hamas is gone. You're definitely seeing the images of people fleeing from North to South Gaza, and that means Hamas is close to being finished, because these are the last of them that stayed there, either fearing Hamas retaliation for living or believing that Hamas can fend off the IDF. The fact that you're seeing people fleeing on a mass basis right now show you that Hamas is nearing its end, but it's not dead yet. And the reason we know this is because how Egypt behaves, and I'll explain. How does Egypt have to do with Hamas? Bear with me here. So Egypt is currently being controlled by a secular guy by the name of Assisi. Now, Assisi is a former general. There's nothing he fears more than the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. These are his mortal enemies in Egypt. Egypt is supposed to be part of the solution. And they're supposed to get paid handsomely by the US, by the international community, for them helping to solve this. Either by managing Gaza in the day after, either by temporarily taking refugees, by basically working with Israel and the US on the security of at least the Egyptian side of Gaza, etc., etc. But right now, Egypt is not playing ball at all. Yesterday, the Egyptians said that the corridor, the humanitarian corridor that allows people to flee from the north to south of Gaza, is a negative development. They fear all this mass of people will push against the Rafah crossing, and essentially a huge wave of Palestinians will find itself in the Sinai Peninsula. Obviously, they don't want these refugees, and they have not agreed to take any, and they refuse to be a part of any initiative of controlling Gaza and ruling Gaza for the interim period until a solution is found. Now, you have to understand, Hamas has a really bloody history with this guy. They have deep ties with ISIS, which is entrenched in the Sinai Peninsula. And they've carried out a lot of terrorist attacks in Egypt with ISIS, with coordination with Hamas. They've assassinated the Attorney General of Egypt in 2015, etc., etc. So there's a lot of bad blood between Egypt and Hamas. All that stopped about 6 years ago. So 6 years ago, the current leader of Hamas, a guy by the name of Yahya Sinwar, comes out and says, yo, Assisi, look, we disagree on everything. You're secular. We're the Muslim Brotherhood. You're Egypt, we're Hamas. We don't care about Egypt. Leave us alone. Don't meddle in our business. And I promise you, we will not work with ISIS on the Sinai Peninsula to do anything that's detrimental to Egyptian security interest. So basically, Sinwar and Assisi from Egypt made a deal, made a pact in 2017. Leave us alone. We're going to leave Egypt alone. We're not going to do anything with the ISIS guys anymore. And both sides have held their own side of this bargain so far. Of course, Egypt is being offered a lot of money, but it's refusing it because Assisi can't do nothing with this money if his government is being overrun by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is what can happen if Hamas starts to cooperating with ISIS again. So Egypt is going to sit there, specifically Assisi is going to sit there, and he wants to make sure that Hamas is actually dead, that it cannot hurt anymore. Hamas is finished, 100% dead like a cockroach, and only then, only once he knows, and once Egypt accepts that Hamas is dead and it cannot come back to revenge and to meddle and to do all this crap in Egypt, then we'll know that Hamas is finished, 100%. The day Egypt participates in either taking refugees or saying that they will be part of the solution in the day after, or coordination, once Egypt starts to play ball, this is when you'll know that Hamas is officially dead. Right now, these people fleeing from the north to the south is a sign that Hamas is dying, but Egypt is going to be the barometer. It's going to tell you exactly the time of death of Hamas. Number two, is there any sense in going down the route of bringing the Palestinian Authority from the West Bank into the Gaza Strip as kind of the de facto day after rulers of the Gaza Strip? Number three, the United States is currently in the Mediterranean in forces that have not been seen there for the past 40 years. It's currently playing defense. What can happen is going to push the United States to go from defense to offense. We're also going to be talking about the aftermath of the Arab Summit in Riyadh, which is still going on. And I'm going to give you a brief update about the state of the war right now on the ground. And on top of it all, if this was not enough, we're going to answer an important question. If Hezbollah would actually launch an attack on Israel, start a second front, how would they do it? Let's start first of all with the update from the war, from the ground. So as it stands right now, we have a lot of moving parts. Shifa Hospital is currently fully surrounded by IDF forces. The coastline of Gaza is virtually almost taken over by the IDF, with little slivers of non-taken territory yet. There's a lot of urban warfare to be had because the main parts of Gaza City that have been mainly bombed and taking over right now are the outskirts. The center of the city is where the most intense urban warfare is expected to be had, and there's still a lot of hell to come. Now, the IDF holds the initiative in this war, there's no doubt about it. The Hamas command chain is in shambles. They are still able to provide some sort of a fragmented fighting force, as we've seen today. I'll talk about that in a second. But as far as the strategic effort to defeat Israel, push it back, they don't have the command center, they don't have the supply chain, they don't have the manpower or the gear to do it. At this point, Israel has cut off their ability to actually reorganize and resupply themselves. To date, we have not seen any evidence of Israeli war crimes. I'm going to repeat this many times until people get this through their head. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of civilian death, which is horrible. But as it says right now, we have not yet been provided anything that shows war crimes have taken place by Israel. Should this change and should we get evidence, we'll talk about it. Now, there's footage that was released today, and it was really interesting because we had a bunch of people coming out of Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza City, firing RPG rockets at tanks and different armor of the Israeli fighting force, then retreating back to the hospital with the RPG launchers, with their weapons. 21 of them were gunned down by the IDF. The rest of them fled back into the hospital. There's no IDF injured personnel. A few tanks were damaged, but nothing serious. At this point, we now have further evidence of Hamas using hospitals as a military base of operation, which in itself is a war crime. And it's another proof in that chain of lone proof of the Hamas using schools, using hospitals, and using various civilian installations to wage a war from, which again is not news at this point if you've been following this war. Now, what I want to talk about first is if the Northern Front actually heats up and goes full blast war, how would Hezbollah escalate it? Now, we've seen the toughest day of fighting yesterday between Hezbollah and the IDF. The Hezbollah has become more and more aggressive in their attempts to fire rockets from Lebanon to Israel. Yesterday, they've managed to injure 13 people really badly, civilians, and it's getting worse by the day. So the question is, if this is the most intense it's gotten so far, it's getting worse every single day. So it seems that the second front might not be such a far-fetched option. Should Hezbollah decides to launch an offensive, this is how it's going to look like. So remember, Hezbollah has about 100,000 out of 50,000 rockets. A lot of them are long distance. A lot of them are precision. They even have a few Scud-D missiles, which have range of 700 kilometers, which basically they can hit anywhere in Israel. And these are heavy payloads, rockets, and missiles that can really wreak a lot of havoc. This is a strategic weapon that can cause a lot of pain in Israel. On top of it, they have lots of, obviously, mortar shells. They have lots of artillery and a unique force that they've built over the years that was trained by the Iranians, by the Al-Quds force that trains these proxies. 2,500 soldiers, elite soldiers, so to speak, that are sitting on the border waiting for command from Hezbollah to launch an offensive into Israel through tunnels that they've dug up that go all the way into Israel, in which they emerge from, and then they basically conquer the north of Israel. That's the plan. Now, the idea here is to use these tunnels and to use artillery, to use mortar shells, and to just blast Israel with thousands of rockets to push the IDF back as the Hezbollah forces will push through. I mean, the force that they have, the 2,500 people, they're not bad. They've been trained by the Al-Quds force in Iran. They're well equipped. They're trained in sniping, in paratrooping, in water ops, guerrilla warfare, sabotage, explosives. And they have experience because they actually fought in Syria. So this is not a bad force, but strategically speaking, it's not going to be enough to do any serious strategic damage to Israel, but it will be enough to cause pain. But I think the end result of what will happen to Lebanon is going to be far worse than what we've seen in 2006. And that's the big question. Will Hezbollah take it upon its hands to destroy what's remaining, so to speak, of the Lebanese economy today? It's a huge question. Now, the second topic I want to talk about today, except Hezbollah, actually the third, because we talked about Hezbollah, we talked about the war updates. I want to talk about the U.S. presence in the Mediterranean. Now, the presence is unprecedented, but here's the thing. From October 7th until October 26th, they haven't done nothing. Now, on October 26th, they actually struck a few specific isolated places in Syria in retaliation to bombings of U.S. forces in Iraq and in Syria. This was a message to Iran to knock it off. Now, right now, you have a huge percentage of the U.S. Navy sitting off the coast of the Mediterranean. This is a massive buildup of power, 2 carrier strike groups. On top of it, you have on the ground in Israel various air defense systems, the THAAD, the Avenger, the Patriots, even an Iron Dome. The U.S. Iron Dome is over there. So there's a lot of manpower, there's a lot of gear, there's a lot of artillery, there's a lot of moving parts from the U.S. that are sitting there. But the concept from the U.S. side is not to go to war with it, is to just use it as a base of operations to carry out pinpoint attacks, to retaliate against any Iranian proxies attacks on U.S. forces. And the second part is to deter the Hezbollah and the Iranians from waging war against Israel by the logic of saying, well, Israel is now engaged in Gaza. They're stretched thin. That's the idea. Let's push from the north and let's open the second front for Israel. So the idea here is this is going to be taken care of by the U.S. and essentially Allah and Iran are going to think twice before doing so. And the latest speeches by Hezbollah actually prove that this strategy has been so far effective. Now, the U.S. public does not want to see boots on the ground in any country that's not the U.S. pretty much. So it's not going to be popular to put troops on the ground. Nobody wants that from the U.S. side. But there's 2 scenarios in which this will have to be the case, in which the United States will go from defense to offense. Scenario number 1 is going to be major casualties of U.S. forces through Iranian proxy attacks in Syria and Iraq and different parts of the world. If the Iranians inflict a lot of pain on the U.S., they'll have to get involved. Scenario number 2, which is something we mentioned here, is that if Hezbollah or Iran make a stupid decision to get involved in this war actively and to start a second front, which is more than what they're doing right now, but not far from where they are right now, then the United States will have to get involved and play actual offense. Because at this point, if Hezbollah actually wages war against Israel, we're talking about thousands of rockets every day. We might see an air defense system that's overwhelmed on the Israeli side by the sheer volume of missiles. So they might need help on the second front. I'm not sure. But whatever happens, the United States is here to basically say, hey, we're here in the Middle East. Hezbollah, Iran, knock it off. And they're also there to say, hey, Hezbollah and Iran, if you actually cause damage to our troops that are beyond, a strike here, strike there, if you actually start going at our bases super hard, we're going to come at your neck. So that's the sort of discussion that are going on right now. And now, there's another conversation that I want to talk about here, and I'm sorry for mixing up all these subjects because there's a lot of moving parts here. So there's a lot of chatter about what happens once the Hamas is wiped out. I think there's a general consensus that Hamas should not be left, to tell about this. There's no way. So the question is, okay, so once Israel defeats Hamas and disarms Hamas and basically takes away its ability to rule Gaza, we're not talking about the destruction of the idea. Who cares about that, right? The question is, what happens in Gaza as far as who is going to be the effective ruler of Gaza? Now, there's a lot of talk about bringing the Palestinian Authority that currently manages the West Bank or parts of it over to Gaza Strip. Now, I want to explain here something very simple. I'm not the decision maker here, so, it's just a guy voicing an opinion, but check this out. So Hamas and Palestinian Authority are not that much different. This is what people fail to understand. And this is important to explain how similar they are how eerily almost identical they are. So while Hamas believes in this religious-based explanation of non-stop war until the destruction of Israel and the killing of all Jews, etc., it's a theological-based idea of a war till the last drop of blood against the existence of Israel at any cost, right? The Palestinian Authority have the same result in mind, but a much slower progression because they're thinking pragmatically. They're saying, well, look, we can't beat Israel in a fair fight. There's nothing we can do to beat them militarily right now. So if we need decades or more to wipe out Israel, let's try and work through this slow progression. They're secular, they're pragmatist, they're not coming from the theological perspective of Hamas, but they are definitely in the, okay, let's run a very long con, let's have a deceit campaign against Israel and the international community, and let's get to the same idea that Hamas wants, which is going to take us a little bit slower, maybe a couple generations. The idea here is to use the goodwill of Israel and the international community and talk the peace talk, creating global legitimacy for Palestinian Authority, and then to ruin Israel slowly, systematically. Think of it like slicing a salami. Like you slice it very, very thin, but eventually the salami runs out. So what I suggest you guys do is don't listen to what the Palestinian Authority representatives are saying in English interviews, because this is the taqiyya, this is the deceit, this is the way to fool the enemy. Listen to some of the interviews that they've had in the Arabic language and have somebody who you trust translate it for you. And I have my sources to that for me because I don't speak fluent Arabic. But there's a very famous interview, and we have that interview on record, and I might actually post it one day, by Abbas Zaki, who's one of the seniors in the Palestinian Authority. And he's talking to an Arab audience in Arabic, and he's saying, look, we all believe in the full Palestine. Full Palestine means, just to kind of get you inside the world of what he's talking about, full Palestine means no Israel. This is a code. This is a dog whistle moment, right? We know that the 1967 borders is not survivable for Israel. So he's saying, look, if we get Israel to accept a peace deal between us and them based on the 1967 borders, we know that Israel cannot defend that for long. It's not survivable for Israel strategically, because essentially the Palestinian Authority is going to carve up Israel from the west side to the east side, from the east side to the west side, which is exactly what the IDF is doing in Gaza right now. So he says, we will go there first, peacefully, without revealing what is our end game, at least not out loud. Well, luckily we have this on record now, so I don't know if he knew he was being recorded or not, or what was the case, but this recording does exist, and it does show to a very, very specific end game here that's being played. So I think that the State Department has to be way more creative and more imaginative in how they want to solve the day after. Because look at the PLO. The PLO is the basis. This is essentially the Palestinian Authority. Now, the PLO, formerly a terrorist organization, currently what has become the Palestinian Authority, is basically, it's 10 tribes, 10 factions. Mainly the one that dominates everything, it's the Fatah. Now, what I want to show you is what they're doing on a daily basis in 2023, not things they've said years ago. Right now, they're running a terrorist fund. Now, this terrorist fund is essentially paying up to 3 times more than the annual salary to the families of terrorists who commit terror against Israel. So if a terrorist goes into prison or it dies or whatever happens, this terrorist or his family will get paid handsomely, up to 3 times more the average salary for doing that by the Palestinian Authority. And here's the crazy part. Even if a Hamas terrorist in Gaza carries out a terrorist attack, his family's Gaza will be paid from this fund from the West Bank by the Palestinian Authority. Also, they have absolutely identical schooling to Hamas. They teach the same curriculum, identical, which is kill all the Jews store our land, the Jews are something that needs to be destroyed, Israel does not exist, Israel is a bullshit lie, blah, 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 blah. We've seen the Hamas education system exposed over the last few weeks. make no mistake about it, the Palestinian Authority was the one who wrote these books. The books that they're using in Gaza were written by the Palestinian Authority. And I've actually posted on my X account a cartoon, a kid show from a Sunday kid show from 2007, where Mickey Mouse talks about how the Jews stole his land and then the Jews killed Mickey Mouse, pretty much. So this is what they show toddlers in 2007. Weirdly enough, those toddlers in 2007 grew up to be Hamas terrorists in 2023 that did what they did on October 7th. The only thing that's preventing the West Bank from becoming Gaza, because people say, well, look, the West Bank isn't carrying out massive amounts of war against Israel, so they must be better. No, that's not the reason why. The reason why is because the IDF has an active presence in the West Bank, in which it actually prevents them from doing so. If the IDF would have left the West Bank like they left Gaza, we would have had the same situation in the West Bank as well. I talked about this. There's definitely other alternatives out there for solutions, such as the emirate structure. Divide Gaza into 6 different Arab emirates and have a different family or a different organization, or some sort of emiratal status where it's kind of each city has its own autonomy, and then all of them are kind of in the federation and an emirate structure in which they all have a police force with handguns, but essentially nothing more than that. And Israel has the overarching kind of security interest on top of that. Now, as always, I appreciate you staying with me till the end of this podcast. I really do. If you want to support this podcast, do nothing. Subscribe to it, like the video, share it with people who have a curiosity for the truth, for objective geopolitical analysis, who do not want to consume propaganda. And I'll see you in the next video. That's all I can ask of you. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed yourself.